This emotional reunion between a lion and men who raised him has touched the heart of millions. This extraordinary bond was first formed in 60s London when two friends rescued and bought a lion cub. And endured even after they released him to fight for acceptance in an African pride. This is the untold story of Christian, the lion cub from heaven. Christian was born in Ilfracombe Zoo, Devon in August 1969. He was part of a litter that had been rejected by their mother. The litter was hand-reared by the zookeepers, but when Christian and his sister were a few months old, they were sold to Harrods, the prestigious department store in London. John Rendell and Ace Bourke were exploring London. They visited Harrods and saw this small lion cub in the window. With no further thought, they bought the cub and took him home to their flat in Chelsea. They made a home for Christian in the basement of the antique shop, and they lived above the shop. Both having grown up with pets, John and Ace looked after Christian and treated him as a giant pet, part of the family. Christian had a gentle and gregarious temperament, but as all babies do, Christian started to get bigger and was becoming more difficult to control in the London environment. Fortunately, one day Virginia McKenna and Bill Travers, actors from the movie Born Free, by chance, visited Sophistocat Antique Shop and saw Christian. They were enchanted by Christian and suggested that Ace and John contact George Adamson to rehabilitate Christian back into the wild and to set him free. Ace and John hadn't actually thought of this option, but knew that as a fully grown lion, Christian wouldn't be able to stay in London. So they contacted George Adamson, who put the wheels in motion with Kenyan Wildlife Services to introduce Christian to Africa. It took months for the bureaucratic wheels to turn in Kenya and for permission to be granted allowing Christian to travel there. In the meantime, Ace and John gave up their jobs in London and moved into a caravan near to Bill Travers' home 30 miles outside of London, out in the countryside. Here there was more space for Christian to exercise and move around in. There was a lot of work needed to be done to get the nearly one-year-old Christian ready for the wilds of Africa, as on arrival to the English countryside he was even scared of a scarecrow and showed very little aggression. After a long flight, Christian still had to travel another 200 miles in the African bush to finally arrive at Kora Nature Reserve. It must have been such a shock for Christian to suddenly find himself in such a different environment. Ace and John traveled with him to Kenya. His first night in the Kenyan bush was ignominious, as Christian still expected his creature comforts and shared a tent with Ace and John. George saw that Christian's natural instincts were intact, but he was extremely inexperienced in this environment. His first year in Kenya was anything but easy. There was a lot to learn. A year after leaving Christian at Kora, in 1971, Ace and John returned to visit him, against a lot of advice that it would be a wasted trip. They were very unsure of what their reception would be when they encountered Christian again, and of course it could be very dangerous. After an anxious time, Ace and John walked into what had then become Christian's territory. George appeared on the top of the hill, about 100 meters away, with Christian right behind him. Christian stopped and took a long hard stare at the two men. Taking his time he slowly ambled down the hill towards the men. The men, no longer able to bear the anticipation and tension, eventually called out his name. Christian came bounding towards them and jumped into their arms, showing a heartfelt recognition and a joyous reunion. He had not only recognized them, but was excited to see the men again. An incredible reunion. On the last night of Ace and John's visit, the men sat up all night laughing and joking with Christian playing the fool, just as he used to as the London Lion. Come the morning though, Christian left to rejoin the other lions. They never saw him again. It was a success. He was no longer dependent on the two men. He had become an African lion.